Things. Mayor Hiremath is saying everybody's been working on this since June. That's 9 months. And then I keep hearing we don't even have drawings yet, and we don't even know what the fees are going to be, and we don't know anything. I mean, so reconcile that for me.
Sure.
The parameters of the makings of the opportunity to purchase the country club we've been working on for 9 months. So the staff ended up taking exactly what's there and not adding anything more or taking anything away from it. So we're still maintaining it, the 31 courts, the fitness center, the golf courses. So what would the investment needed to be in order to rehab that building basically as is, and then creating a revenue source through a half-cent sales tax in order to fund some things that has yet to be determined. But one of the big things is ADA requirements. As a private ownership, they don't have to be ADA compliant.
So why don't you have that's not my question. My question is, you had 9 months to get exact numbers on all this, and nobody has any.
The question or answer I would give it to you is that when you buy a fixer-upper house and somebody says, give me an exact number of everything that you want to do over the next 5 years, you're going to be very hard-pressed. You're going to pick out your priorities. You're going to lay out what you need to do first, second, third, and as the years go by, you're going to decide to do X, you're going to decide to do Y, you're going to decide to do Z. So we don't have a magic ball and say this is exactly what we're going to do and we're not going to deviate from that. What we did was we took a rough preliminary numbers and we took an idea of what we were going to do with it, which is to retain it as is. And in order for it to retain it as is, there are certain parameters that once you turn it over from private to public, i.e. ADA requirements, what is that initial cost going to have to be for that first year? The second year, what are we going to end up doing? I think we're going to replace the irrigation system on one of the golf courses.
But you don't have exact numbers.
Just real quick to answer your question, 2 of the 3 council members who were not there advocated for a property tax. And I just can't do that. I mean, that's just an enormous burden on our residents again. And so, but you're right, there was going to have to be a dedicated source, so it would have to be substantial. With the tennis courts, just so you know the cost, I think Councilmember Zinkin did some homework on this, and he said the 4 courts that were going to go on the Norana Park site, 4 tennis courts, $125,000 each. So we're looking at $500,000, $500,000 for 4 tennis courts. We got 31. That's just the tennis courts alone for $1 million. So again, you know, what it comes down to is that in our minds, for the value that we're getting, yes, you can nitpick every single little thing out of there, but is the value that we're getting good and beneficial for the town of Oro Valley? In my opinion, it is. And people have their own opinion.
My question has to do with procedures.
The due diligence has been done since June for the council members and the town of Oro Valley staff. The conversations about talking to the public on how we arrived at that due diligence, we had to first decide whether the council was going to acquire it or not acquire it. And if the council was going to acquire it, which we did on the 17th, we were going to use from December 18th until the actual acquisition, which is going to be early March, to go out and let people know if they have questions. Here's the due diligence that was done over the last 6 months. Here are the numbers that we arrived with. Here's how we came with our facts and figures. And we're just kind of opening it up to the public so the public can ask questions to see that we did our due diligence and it took us over 6 months to do that due diligence. That's what I'd say.
Hi.
The question was, why didn't we talk to the YMCA and see if we can form kind of partnership, because the recreation amenities that we're looking at are very reminiscent of a YMCA. So what I said was at the time, and this is probably 5, 6 years ago, no, actually it was 4 years ago, it was my first year as mayor, so I think it was in the second year. They had approached us and said, we want to create a partnership with you, but we want a building, this is what we want it to be, and it's going to cost between $4 and $5 million. And the partnership we want to create is that we want you to build it for us. So what I had said is I didn't explore any further because I can't engage the town or even bring it to the council to say that we want to be able to build a building for a private entity that's not town owned, because we wouldn't own that building.
Okay,
Okay, so it would have cost $5 million.
It was just in passing conversation. So I think Mike Rousat actually ended up saying that the other building on Shannon, for what he wanted to do here was gonna be around $5 million. I think Paul Kiesler has that number for the Shannon Road one, but he'll talk with that. But it was no formal plans, it was no appraisal, it was no estimate, because the innocent question I asked him, well, what kind of money are you looking at? That was probably $4 or $5 million. In answer to us, the acquisition date wasn't going to take place till March. The decision had to be made very, very quickly because, again, you had 2 other developers in line and you had another golf course owner in line. So once the decision was made, up or down, if it was down, none of us would be here. But since it was up, we're here. We always planned to use from December 18th all the way through February to have meetings like this and do the due diligence that we should have done at the get-go.
Yes.
But the problem is that we couldn't do the due diligence at the get-go.
It's sort of then, what is the point? Why are we?
Legally,
what
we
is
cannot
the
do
point?
that. There is no provision allowed by law that lets us do that. Zero.
That lets you do what?
So take it to a vote to the referendum. Every legislative action goes through a very democratic process. Once the council makes a decision, then individuals have a right for a referendum. The process is very, very exacting for a reason. And that reason is the majority of elected officials in that municipality passed a legislative decision. So the state constitution said we need to make sure that if it's a referendum process, here are the exact rules that need to be followed. And if they're followed, then it goes to a referendum vote. But the reason that they don't stall and they don't let X go by or Y go by or Z go by, it's because it's, again, a legislative action that's going to be enacted into law, basically. And so just a few individuals can't hold up a legislative process. So back to your point, we can do that having said no, but it would be like asking Congress and the President of the United States to suspend the Constitution because somebody doesn't agree with it. So can they, in effect, suspend the Constitution of the United States if they choose so? Absolutely they could. Do they want to do that? No,
they
because
don't.
what it does is it opens up a can of worms for any disagreement and it sets a precedent that rules are in place for a reason. So without rules and without a very defined framework, you have anarchy. And so, again, if you want the focus about why it's not going to the referendum vote, you would have to talk to the people who went out and did the referendum and why they weren't exacting, because it's a book that they have to follow. It's my understanding they sought legal opinions as well before they did the referendum process, and apparently something went wrong. And so right now we cannot, and I think I'll have Tobin explain that.
I'm just going to have one.
Yes,
small-
absolutely. Because again, there's correspondence all the way from June leading up to really what the parameters were, the financial decisions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one component of it. The appraisal itself, you're a little bit off there. Councilmember Hornet didn't say, let's just take a look at the pictures. What he said is, out of that whole document, there's an enormous amount of pictures there. So as far as the actual written text, there wasn't that much written text. And there's also a summary area in there which basically said that the appraised value is $3.25 million when they did the appraisal, and the replacement value, if somebody were going to go in there and actually build what they have there, was $42 million. So yes, we got that the day before, but I skimmed through it and I actually read through it, and I had enough time, and I'm a fully employed dentist by trade with young kids, one of them as young as 8. And so, I can't remember your third question as far as, the extra material that was given on the dais or the day before. That was just a little bit, I think Mr. Caden ended up pulling out a component because it was in a 10-year projection, not a 5-year projection, so he ended up pulling that one out. So, again, the long and the short answer to your question is yes. Every council member had the same opportunity to go through that. And 4 of us went through that. I went through it on the busy schedule that I have, so I feel that they had ample time. Right, but the problem with the YMCA being nonprofit, they wanted to build this, they wanted us to build it for them. So, and where they wanted to put it was Innovation Park. Because they wanted to draw from Santa Fe and Ventana and this and that, but you're looking at almost a $5 million building. And we can't do a $5 million building to build it for somebody who's not affiliated with the town as a nonprofit. So, yes, I did explore that. Now, not to feel like we're all piling up on you either, but, you know, the 18-hole golf course is just that. They're 2 18 holes. But let's just say 2 or 3 holes on each side get developed. There's no 15-hole golf course. So the problem is that if the other 15 holes goes brown, or 14 or 13 or 12 or whatever, it still goes brown. That's our problem. So you have property owners, you have over 1,300 property owners that live along one of those 45 homes, I think, Paul, at 800 did an actual count, and that's really just directly abutting the course, not the interior homes and things like that. So yes, to your point, it's no, all 45 holes will not get developed, and nobody's saying that they are. And I think that's one of the misinformations that we have to clear up, is that if 2 or 3 or 4 holes on each side get developed, well, there goes the whole course. And then all of a sudden, property values and things like that. So that's really
that a section of the golf course for development would be worth more than $500,000, so it would have to go to a public vote, unlike the purchase of the country clubs.
yes. So let me.
Which was $1 million.
So let me tell it to you this way.
All right.
The reason that I wanted to pursue an opportunity presented to the council is because the 3 people in line, 2 were development, 1 was a golf course owner.
Mm-hmm.
And so my concern was that if it went to development, there are entitlements there that the town would have no say. Obviously, it wouldn't be all 45 holes, because for 5 or 10 different reasons. But there's a 5-acre finger on the El Conquistador Country Club side. If you know where the main putting green is, and the 18th green and the first tee.
I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
So
very
right on
well.
the top there, Bert Lopez kept that for development, because he does have ingress, egress there, and then he wants to plan to put up some homes at some point in the future. So what I did not tell him is that the other land had entitlements. Shame on me. And the reason is because I didn't want him to really not be in a position to see the benefits of actually the town acquiring it and maintaining it as a golf course. So make no mistake, we intend to operate that exactly as is. But it comes down to who controls the 330 plus acres. The town of Oro Valley, which means that we would have to go to a public vote if the golf course failed and we had to come to a Plan B or Plan C. But we're not even looking at Plan B or Plan C's, we're gonna maintain it as a golf course, or if it got turned to private development right off the get-go. So this is a question I have for Paul, because I don't even know this question. Is there anything in the rule book, Paul, that would stop a developer, if it went to a developer, from mowing down the country club, mowing down the tennis courts, mowing down the greens and the fairways, and then getting a whole bunch of acreage there if it went to private development? There's nothing in the rule book. If they own it, they can do what they want to do with it, correct?
Yes.
In fact, Mayor, as you provide the revenue for the capital improvement projects that are going to be required. Every other revenue source would have to be 100% borne by the Oro Valley resident or the Oro Valley business owner, because the utility tax, the commercial lease tax, or a renter's tax if you're renting a home or an apartment, or a property tax, 100% of that burden is shouldered by the Oro Valley resident. Sales tax is a little bit unique, because 30 cents, roughly 30 cents of every dollar comes from a visitor who comes to our town, whether they visit Tohono Chul or come up here to go hiking and biking, or they come up to the marketplace to go see a movie. So it's really not shared 100% by the Oro Valley resident. And so that's why the sales tax was more palatable to me than the other 4, because I, as an Oro Valley resident, would have to pick up 100%, which is a true dollar. So that's why the sales tax. The second question about Trude, it's a 3-legged stool the way I see it. So you need to have somebody who was going to sell it to the town for a gaga deal, and that was HSL, so that's one leg. The other leg was finding a reputable practice management company. If you look at golf courses across the country, the demise of golf courses really is twofold. One, they had to leverage an enormous amount of debt capital to acquire the course to begin with. And then in very tough recessionary times, what happens is that you don't have a good practice management structure. So if you look at whether it's Stone Canyon or the Gallery or Seawalla Golf Club down at Casino del Sol or La Paloma or the 5 City of Tucson golf courses, Oro Valley Country Club was another one just recently. They're defaulting to a strong practice management service. So the town of Oro Valley starts with 0 debt, and we have a strong practice management service. Troon only signed on board because they actually looked at this property a few years back, and they elected not to come on board because there was no capital investment being made. So for those of you who've been to the country club, you know for the last 8, possibly 10 years, there's just been no capital improvement on a yearly basis in order for the upkeep. So we are here today, well actually we were on December 17th, deciding on do we buy a fixer-upper house, which has pretty good bones and good structure for it, and relatively speaking from the ground up, cost-wise to acquiring something like that and then investing in it and remodeling it, so to speak, to the tune of about $8.5 million, I think it is. I'm sure the staff's going to correct me if I'm wrong. Or do we build something from the ground up for $20 million? And I think that's what it came down to. So we felt through the staff's input, through our own personnel doing due diligence on the building, that yeah, the bones are fairly good. So if you buy a fixer-upper house at the end of 5 or 6 years, the money that you invest in it, you can exponentially gain your return on investment. Or if it's a house that you fixed up the way you want it to, little by little every year, then you get to decide whether you want to live it or not. But that's an enviable position to be in, and that's why we chose this route. And again, I didn't make that decision unilaterally like some people think. This is a council vote, and the majority of the council elected to acquire the property.